Hey, hi everyone. Welcome to our 13th meeting of this Rotary year. Before we start, let's hear the housekeeping rules. Over to you, Klaus.
Good evening. Today I greet you from Germany. I'm at my home and I'm happy to join our meeting today.
How is Germany?
Very nice weather. You see, on Saturday, I was on the Zugspitze, the highest mountain. This is one of the panorama views. In 2,900-meter altitude. Yeah.
Very nice.
Very nice. So now I start with the housekeeping rules. And so please make sure that you are registered with your full name. And please keep switch on the video throughout the whole session. And as Jessica said, we will record you and the photos can be kept for promotion of the club. And you will be muted throughout the talks. And later on, you can raise your hand and ask question to our speaker and or to the president. And you can also use, when you want to speak to everybody or to some other member, by the chat function. Thank you very much.
Thank you to our Sergeant at Arms, Klaus. Dr. Klaus enjoying himself in Germany.
Yes, I escaped.
Thank you for doing this.
Lockdown.
I know the time is for you a bit difficult, but we thank you nevertheless.
No, it's very easy. It's just lunchtime. Yeah.
Okay. Right, I shall share screen now. Okay, so today is the 13th Rotary meeting for the year 2021-2022. And we welcome all our friends from overseas or visiting Rotarians. There are quite a few today. I don't have the exact figure. I only know Rotarian Alec from Hanover. We have PDG Dato Mustafa. Okay, thank you all for coming and for many others. Okay, and now may I invite one of our youngest and newest Rotarians, Rotarian Imani, to raise a toast to Rotary International, Rotary Club of Hanover, and Rotary Club of Dato Mustafa. My apologies, I believe it's Malacca, right?
Rotary International.
Imani, please.
Thank you, President Lewis. It is my pleasure today to raise a toast to the Rotary Club of Hanover, Germany. And we are pleased this evening to have Rotarian Alec Herzl, who is from the Rotary Club of Hanover. Fellow Rotarians, please join me in a toast to the Rotary Club of Hanover, coupled with a toast to Rotary International.
Cheers to Hanover and Rotary International. And Malacca.
Yes.
Thank you very much. This is very kind.
Yeah.
Yes. So Alec, would you like to say a few words about your club?
Thank you very much. I'm happy to do so. The Rotary Club of Hanover is one of the older clubs in Germany, almost reaching, I think, some 85 years now of age, certainly the oldest in Hanover. But we have currently 5 clubs in Hanover, although it's a medium-sized city of 500,000. It's a very active Rotarian place. We have about 120 members, of which some 75 are active. I'm currently semi-active because my profession brought me to Frankfurt about 2 years ago. However, thanks to Corona and thanks to the fact that many meetings are digital, I'm able now again to participate in club life. And I think that's about it. I don't want to take too much of your time, but thank you very much for the invitation. It's very kind to have me with you. And I'm enjoying that hour with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Rotarian Alec. Just a little bit of background. When both of us were young and we both had hair, we met Alec in Singapore when he was a road tractor. And that must have been in a year like 1994, 95?
95.
95, that's right. And we met in the office of VP Alfred Wong, who hosted our monthly Saturday meetings for the Rotary Club of Singapore City. And it's been a long journey. We have maintained friendship, and very pleased to have you here. Thank you.
Absolutely. And perhaps I may add that the president of the Rotary Club then is my current wife. So my roots go long back to Singapore. I worked there in 95, stayed many years in Asia and other locations, also Hong Kong and Tokyo, and have now the Singaporean family at home.
Yes. So if some of you who remember Sunita Sitartan, who was president of the Rotary Club of Singapore City. So Alec came here and then he took her, and then she's there now. Very happy family with a son, Anil.
Thank you.
Correct. Thank you.
Last week, Sunita attended our meeting. And this week is you. Very good. And now, if I may turn to some announcements. We have birthday greetings for Ansh Anshul for yesterday. And then we have VP Ronald Wong tomorrow, VP JK Ong, who is here today on the 1st of October, and Pak Wilson Wijaya on the 5th of October. Happy birthday to all of you. May you all have good health and happiness.
Thank you.
And we also have wedding anniversary, the celebrants being PP Philip and Effie Leong for 2nd of October. Not sure if PP Philip is here, but let us all wish them well and wish them many more good years ahead. Next. This evening, some of you had seen the poster, and we were supposed to have KIFER, which is Know Your Fellow Rotarians. And unfortunately, Rotarian Pauline was supposed to share with us about her, her journey, her career and life as a Rotarian. But due to some emergency, she's not able to do it tonight. So in place of KIFER, we have two important things that are going on. One would be by Rotarian Adnan, who's going to talk to us about end polio. Rotarian Adnan, please.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you, President Luis, for giving me this opportunity to speak to our members, and also greeting to all the PDGs and honorary members and invited guests and members from other Rotary Club as well. You can hear me clearly, Luis? Okay. As President mentioned just now, EPN in short, or End Polio Now, it's one of the major drive from Rotary International. And I don't think you need much introduction to this program, because even the new members also, I suppose you are aware of it. From our club, we try to organize every year some event. Last year, we, in support of District 3310 initiative, we also joined in the Step to End Polio awareness program, and we raised funds to donate to the district fund and eventually to the End Polio Polio Plus Fund in Rotary International. This year also, we are arranging our own walk. I just got it approved this Monday, thanks to President Luis and his board. So you will receive one announcement shortly from Club Secretariat. And the plan is we will launch our own walk program from 24th of October, which is the World Polio Day. It's a Sunday, and we will continue for 2 months until Christmas Eve. On 25th of December, Saturday, we'll finish this walk. And you will have all the details. Due to COVID-19, physical meeting and restrictions are there. So whatever the time allows, depending on MOH guidelines, if it is 2 persons or 5 persons, we'll go along with that. And for each registration, we'll collect $50 US or 70 Singapore dollars. But it is not limited. You are free to donate any amount of funds to the End Polio. And I would urge all members, your family and friends, to come forward and join this drive so that we can do our part as the club, as the largest and oldest club in Singapore. I think it's very important that we put a solid mark every year to make a significant contribution to end polio now. Thank you, President.
Thank you very much, Rotarian Adnan. Rotarian Adnan was instrumental in last year's end polio project. And this year, when I asked whether he is willing to do it again, he never said no for more than 1 second. In fact, he never said no at all. He was very robust and said, let's go. So please order your t-shirts. I know all of us have a lot of t-shirts, but this end polio t-shirt is one way to raise funds. It's 14 ringgit, but you convert it, come on, divide by 3 point something. Okay, let's say it's divided by 3. We still have a lot of savings. It's not more than a packet of chicken rice. Shall we all just please support Rotarian Adnan in this drive to buy the t-shirt and then let's do our walk. I've asked Rotarian Francesco, who has the icebreaker going on, that maybe we think about matching buddies and go for a walk. So see who's the lucky one. Okay, thank you. Next, we have another important project which undertaken by the VSC committee. So let's hear about the hawker centers being digitalized from the tech team of Vinit and Sonali. Over to you.
Thank you, President. Let me just share a slide very quickly. Can you see my screen?
Yes, Vinit.
All right, thanks. So very quickly, since we just have a couple of minutes. So what we had decided earlier, and this is from an earlier update, that we would support the Alexandra Village Food Center. We've been having multiple rounds of discussion with the government, IMDA, and the Esg Digital Office. And it's evolving into not just helping them go digital, but also seeing if there are different ways we can help them actually get more business. So we are actually kickstarting with one on-site activity this Sunday. And the date came up simply because the MP for that area, Minister Eric Chua, had time that day and said, hey, can we kickstart something very quickly? So what we're doing is an initiative to sponsor meals for deserving people in a nearby block, and that is being identified currently by the People's Association. So the aim is to really do two things in one shot, right? That we support the hawkers, source food for 100 people from there, and deliver it to the needy people who are living in a nearby block. And that is something which we are doing along with IMDA. We are currently having some logistic discussion to make sure we can do this within social distancing norms. So we are looking for about 10 volunteers to help us this Sunday to be able to distribute food to these people, which will be procured from the hawker center that we are sponsoring. We are also kickstarting a discussion along with the Hawker Association and IMDA on the digitization part of it. So we will be helping them set up a Facebook page, helping them really do a lot more digital business through online platforms, etc. So this is not a one-off. This is going to be something that we'll have a series of events on. But the very first one is going to be this kickoff event this Sunday. So we have sent out a mail on the VSC group. We will send it on the CSC as well. So happy to see some volunteers already signing up over there. And yes, if you're oversubscribed, we'll figure out something. We'll do another week of this. So the intent is really to kickstart this and make this a long-term project. So thanks for the time, President Lewis, and really hope a lot of members can share in this.
Next, very interestingly, we are now going to hear from Mr. Kevin Edmonds. And with that, I would like to invite our moderator for this evening's fireside chat, Dr. Ganesh, to do the introductions. Dr. Ganesh, please.
Hello, everyone. A very good evening to everyone. A very good evening to President, and thank you for the introduction. And a very good evening to all the distinguished local and overseas members and guests. Thank you very much for allowing me to be the moderator for this fireside chat with a very esteemed gentleman, Mr. Kevin Edmonds, who is by far the expert in his field. Basically, the title of today's fireside chat, the fireside chat is going to be a lecture by Mr. Edmonds and subsequently followed by quick fire question and answer session where you can tap on his knowledge and expertise. The topic being businesses as champions for the environment and sustainability, as brought forward by the Sustainability Club of our Rotary Club of Singapore. The vital roles that all businesses, whatever size or sector, they can play, a role they can play to safeguard the planet for the future generations. So that will be the topic. Just a brief page-long introduction on Mr. Kevin Edmonds. He's a seasoned sustainability expert. He has devoted his entire career to one ultimate goal, helping businesses and communities transition to low carbon, circular, and net zero economies that embrace nature-based solutions. Kevin possesses almost 30 years of experience advising multilateral agencies, governments, statutory boards, listed companies, family businesses and startups across a diverse range of sectors, including real estate, construction, agribusiness, forestry, maritime, aviation, petrochemical, industrial, manufacturing, logistics, hospitality, tourism, and finance. His technical expertise embraces ESG strategies. By the way, I just found out that ESG means sustainability, environment, social governance, which we all need for our companies, implementation and disclosure, environmental risks, climate scenarios, impact assessment, due diligence and compliance, sustainability-linked and green loans and bonds. His expertise also includes green building certification, renewables, smart cities and infrastructure, clean tech, pollution prevention and greenhouse gas emissions reduction, life cycle assessment, product labeling, and supply chain engagement. Basically, everything that every single company in every single sector need. A little brief introduction on himself. He was born and educated in the United Kingdom. He currently lives in Singapore with his, again, Singapore-born wife and children, working as regional manager with Peterson Projects and Solutions, where he oversees business development, team growth, client engagement, and project delivery in 19 regional offices. His prior career highlights include in-house sustainability lead at Hong Kong Science Park, who are Asia's premier innovation and technology ecosystem, embracing many sectors like AI, big data, biotech, green tech, robotics, and other R&D cluster platforms. His highlights include being the founding executive director of Hong Kong Green Building Council, principal consultant and COO at the non-profit Business Environment Council in Hong Kong, and consulting and freelance advisory for multiple boards, including statutory, regulatory bodies, startups, SMEs, listed companies, family businesses, I've mentioned before. He is a very passionate advocate for sustainability and climate stewardship. He has featured at over 500 different events as a speaker and served on many different executives and advisory committees of numerous business chambers, trade and industry associations, public consultation, and government agencies.
Delighted to be here this evening. I've given 2 or 3 presentations to the Rotary Club in Hong Kong over the years. Excuse me, this is my first time in Singapore. My family and I arrived here 5 months ago. Of course, it's like a second home to me because, in fact, I married here in the early 2000s and we're already very settled in. I'm pleased to say, despite the situation that every country is facing. Thank you very much. So, good evening, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. President, members, Dr. Ganesh. Thank you for facilitating this short presentation. Could you hit the next slide, please? Actually, I was intending to talk a little bit about the Singapore Green Plan, which is, of course, the most, I think, significant policy initiative from the Singapore government, and gives a lot of interesting discussion points. But I understand that there was a presentation on the Green Plan not too long ago, and so I decided not to go over that ground, but happy to talk a little bit in the Q&A if that's if that is of interest. So what I thought I would try and do instead is to maybe give a little bit of insight into how I see corporations, companies large and small, beginning to engage in that sustainability environment and sustainability agenda. So I will go through step by step the UN SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, a slide on sustainability reporting, a slide on climate risks and opportunities, and then a slide on green, social, or sustainable finance. And then I will finish with some take-home messages. I don't intend this to be a lecture, really. And I don't honestly really consider myself an expert in sustainability. I've certainly seen a lot, but there are many other people in society that have much greater insight into different aspects of sustainability than I do. I am rather quite a generalist. I will say, and I might give away my age here, but when I was born, the population of the Earth was 3.6 billion people. And the population of the Earth now, of course, is almost 8 billion people. Also, when I was born, we had about 300 parts per million of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. And nowadays we have 420 parts per million of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. And it's beyond doubt that that increase in carbon dioxide has originated from human activity. And it's beyond doubt that that level of carbon dioxide now is contributing to global warming or climate change, whichever term we choose to use. Some people might dispute that. To me, that doesn't really matter. To me, I think that humans, as you know, the most ingenious species on the planet, we have no right and no interest to waste resources and pollute our environment, whether or not we believe in climate change. As one of the executives from Shell once said famously many years ago, the Stone Age did not finish because we ran out of stone. The Stone Age finished, of course, because we found better ways of doing things. And that's the message, I think, from me this evening, is that there are better ways that we can do things that will improve our lives, improve prosperity, health and well-being, but also have very beneficial impacts on the environment. Next slide, please. So I will start with the Sustainable Development Goals, the UN SDGs, or they're called also the Global Goals. And as the name suggests, these have been compiled and endorsed and are being implemented by the majority of the governments around the world. And these essentially are beginning to, or starting to set policy frameworks for almost all of the sustainability issues that are facing our societies in every country in the world. In general respects, we consider sustainability to comprise three main sort of elements. One is environmental. What impacts do we have on the air that we breathe, the water that we drink, the soil that we use to grow our plants and our food, and how can we conserve the environment? The second aspect is social development, equal rights, access to education, diversity, discrimination, those kinds of issues. And the third element, from a business perspective, we talk about business and we talk about profit. So often when business people talk about sustainability, they say the 3 Ps, right? People, profit, and planet. But the Sustainable Development Goals, number 17, they focus on partnerships. And the reason is that the Sustainable Development Goals on their own really are signposts for nations to start developing their own national policies, whether it's in relation to poverty eradication, climate mitigation, sustainable consumption, and so on. Those are all government policy matters. However, those policies all filter down to businesses in different nations in different ways and shapes. And so there's an emergence of many more corporations, particularly larger corporations, but also smaller companies that begin to align themselves with the objectives of the Sustainable Development Goals. Behind these 17 goals, there are, I think, 169 specific objectives. Obviously, don't want to go through all of those tonight, but those objectives relate much more closely to things that companies can do. For instance, changing the type of fuel that they might use in their industries, finding solutions to recycling waste and those kind of things. So the UN SDGs, for me, provide a really good sort of overview and a good roadmap, if you like, for what corporations can begin to do in engaging in sustainability and contributing to a more equitable, more environmentally sustainable planet. The next slide, please. And the next one, sorry. So the second thing I wanted to mention was sustainability reporting, or as Dr. Ganesh mentioned, ESG strategies, environment, social governance. And this kind of begins to look at the way that markets in particular are judging the performance of companies, investors, lenders, and so on. ESG reporting has been around for many, many years. We might not have heard about it so much. It was really initiated by the power companies, the oil and gas industry, maybe in the 1970s, when we would, you would see on the news about the oil spills and how much pollution they cause, and they started to write their environmental reports to defend themselves, to make themselves look good. Over the years, we've seen standards being developed that dictate or try to at least provide guidance on what kind of information should be provided. And you can see here the logos of the Singapore Exchange, the Hong Kong Exchange. Those are two exchanges that have their ESG reporting requirements. If you want to be listed on the SGX or the Hong Kong X, you need to produce an annual report. And each of those exchanges provides criteria that you need to fulfill, at least disclosures that you need to make in relation to environmental performance, your social performance, and your governance. But there's still a lot of debate upon really how useful these reports are, and particularly the incidence of greenwashing, which is a phenomenon when companies can tell you about the really good things that they do, but then they don't tell you about the not so good things that they do. And so we can expect more and more scrutiny on the different kinds of standards which are being implemented and the kinds of disclosures which are being demanded of these reporting companies. The next slide, please. Now, climate change, of course, I think we're all very familiar with the terminology and the concern. As I've mentioned, global temperatures are increasing. That is going to have a very significant impact, perhaps not on our lives, but certainly on the lives of our future generations, our children, their children's children. In Singapore, it is a particularly significant concern. One of the elements of the Singapore Green Plan, of course, is for Singapore to become self-sufficient, more self-sufficient in terms of the food it produces. And that is really a critical issue. Much of the rice and the other foodstuffs that we obtain in Singapore, they originate from Vietnam and other countries in Southeast Asia. Those countries are facing their own challenges, their own imperatives, due to sea level rise, to increased extreme weather events, to the salination of the water that they use to grow their crops. It's very, very likely that the available land for growing crops is going to decrease over the next 10 years. There's growing competition for land. Should we use it to grow our food? Should we use it to grow food for cattle, for meat? Should we use it to grow biofuels that we can use for renewable energy? Should we cover it up with photovoltaic panels? All of these are conflicting uses of land, and we need to have a very systematic approach to addressing those issues. Climate risk is the latest kind of emerging aspect of ESG, if you like, and environmental reporting. Companies now, the leading companies, are really beginning to quantify what will be the impacts on their business, on their revenues, on their expenditures, on their assets, their capital, their access to financing. They're now performing risk assessments on what will those financial implications of climate change be in the next 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years. So some companies are being very forward-looking and beginning to adapt their business plans accordingly. The next slide, please. And finally, I will touch on sustainable financing. Again, this is something which is in the news more and more often. Of course, in principle, it's a very good thing. In the old days, institutional investors, private investors could invest in anything. And of course, their interest was investing in things which would provide the greatest return. In most cases, the things that provided the greatest return were the most polluting, the most damaging to ecology, the most unsustainable use of resources. So the finance industry really has a very critical role to play in beginning to direct finance away from those dirty, polluting industries and directing that finance to cleaner, more innovative, low-carbon industries. And so you may have heard in the news quite recently, Malaysia, I think 2 or 3 days ago, announced its target for carbon neutrality by 2050. The finance industry, Malaysia is already a very active green finance industry, which will be absolutely critical in helping Malaysia achieve its target. And the same, of course, can be said for those other nations in the region. So generally speaking, of course, there are many different lenders on the landscape. We have our international development agencies like the IFC, the International Finance Corporation, the World Bank, the Asian Development Bank. They all have their requirements and principles for sustainable investment, for sustainable finance. The examples I've shown here are more from the capital markets, so more relating to the private sector. But again, in order to label your instrument as sustainable, whether it's a green bond or a social bond or a sustainability linked loan or a green sukuk, you have to comply with these standards in order to fulfill those, to be able to call yourself a green loan. So the final slide, please. So I've just given a very quick overview. I haven't gone into any detail because I know that everybody around the table here tonight has very different backgrounds, very different interests, very different levels of understanding of environment and sustainability. I've tried to cater for everybody. I hope I've been able to do that. But my take-home message is always for particularly smaller businesses is number one, that leadership is key. And really, of course, everybody looks to the leader of the business for the vision, the mission, the direction. All of those things nowadays really need to embrace environment and sustainability, social and community kind of considerations. The second thing I would say is engage your people, engage your value chain, and engage your community. As we've seen, sustainability and ESG is a very intertwined, very complex, very broad area. We often feel as individuals, what can I do as an individual? What can I do as an individual company? And the finding is always, if you reach out to your employees, to your clients, your customers, your suppliers, your contractors, your regulators, and especially if you reach out to your community, green groups, community groups, startups, the rest, you will find solutions. So you don't need to try and address these big issues on your own. You can work with your partners to find solutions. Be systematic, be proportionate to the scale of your activities, take things step by step, participate in government initiatives where you can, lend your support to the government, get the business sector moving in the same direction, adopt recognized standards, buy certified products and supplies, if you can do, to contribute to good supply chain practices, invest in green tech and social enterprises, particularly where you're able to do that. Most importantly, communicate, share your successes and your lessons learned. And I always think it's best to start very, very simply. And my immediate questions, and including to my current employer, who I've quite recently joined, my questions are, what is our energy footprint? What is our waste footprint, including food waste? What is our plastics footprint, our water footprint, our greenhouse gas emissions footprint? And if we can't answer those questions for our own company, then we really need to look at ourselves and say, well, how genuinely are we concerned about sustainability, ESG? How can we really make a meaningful contribution to improvement in the business community, but which is going to benefit, of course, the wider community, not just for today, but for generations to come. So with that, I will end my presentation. I hope it's not too much of a lecture, and I thank you for listening to me.
Thank you so much, Mr. Edmunds. That was very, very informative and very, very eye-opening actually for me. And I believe that your summary was so good that it kind of like answered some of the questions that have been posted already. As you can see in my background, on my left-hand side, there's a little tree there. So I'm trying my best to remove the carbon from my constant talking. And on my right side, I'm trying to recycle stuff, and my kids are helping with that with their diagrams. And behind me is empty because I'm paperless. So I'm trying to save the trees as well. But the first question by Rotarian Uttam, he mentioned that ESG is something that even the big MNCs are finding difficult to handle. How can SMEs contribute to the ESG concepts? Any suggestions? I think partly you mentioned in your summary.
Yes, I did. I think that the ESGs, of course, sorry, the MNCs, the multinationals, are of course generally quite high profile, recognized brand names that I think have to answer to their customers much more nowadays than they ever had to before. And so recently we've seen in the news, I mentioned Shell earlier on, Shell's shareholders essentially voted against the adoption of the climate targets that Shell had proposed, its climate reduction targets, because some of those shareholders felt that those targets were not rigorous enough. A lot of companies are saying, well, we're going to be carbon zero by 2050, but actually they're not doing anything now. And what they're doing is they're waiting until 2045 and then they'll do something. But of course, in the intervening 25 years, we have pushed out many, many billions of tons of carbon dioxide, which is just going to make the matter worse. So the large multinationals, they're being watched very, very closely. And so for them, the ESG criteria and standards are really, really very complicated. And as the questioner asks or mentions, a lot of these big corporations are struggling to embrace all of these ESG standards because they are becoming more complicated and they are proliferating across different sectors. So in the banking sector, you have the Equator Principles. In the marine sector, you have the Poseidon Principles, all of these different kind of standards. I think as an SME, you don't need to worry about that. For an SME, you really need to think about who are your shareholders, who are your stakeholders, and what are their expectations. So the fundamental first step, if you like, for any organization in embarking on its ESG strategy is to engage its stakeholders. First of all, to identify who are your stakeholders. And that depends, of course, very much on what sector you are working in, active in. But your stakeholders, of course, they include your staff, they include your customers, they might include your local neighborhood where you do business. They certainly include your supply chain, your suppliers, your contractors, your vendors. And as I say, engaging those stakeholders is really critical in helping you identify what are the serious issues. And we call it materiality. What is material to your organization? And it's quite a straightforward exercise to do a materiality assessment, to make a list of issues. If they're environmental issues, they might be energy use, waste, wastewater, pollution, all of those things. And it's very easy really to do a matrix, create a matrix and say, well, our energy consumption, how significant is that? Well, if you're office-based and you're renting a space from an office, likely your energy consumption might not be the biggest part of your total environmental footprint. Maybe your production facilities elsewhere make up the majority of your energy consumption. But by doing that sort of footprinting exercise, as I mentioned in the last slide, and engaging your stakeholders, then you can begin to prioritize which are the most critical issues for you. And so I think for any SME, whilst you might make a reference to the GRI reporting standards, these very long standards are 200, 300 pages long. I would not encourage any SME to take that on as a kind of mission to issue a report against the GRI standards. SMEs can do it very, very simply. Actually, the SGX, the Singapore Exchange ESG reporting guide is a very good guide. Really sort of the very basic elements, if you like, of ESG reporting. So I would say that's a good place to start.
Can I? Yes, sir. We have any questions from the floor?
Yeah. Can I step in a little bit? We've talked about, I was the one who asked the question about the MNCs versus the SME. Whilst you've talked about some of the things which the SMEs can do, there are many organizations, especially in Singapore, where there are one-man operations, probably a very small enterprise rather than an SME, to even just read through the 200 pages of the ESG proposals, probably find very difficult to read through it, leave aside trying to implement some of these things. What would you recommend to the very small enterprises, and how can they contribute to this whole ESG factor?
I think my advice would be, again, outreaching to various social groups that are here in Singapore. I don't know so many because I've not been here for such a long time, but I do know one of them is called Green Drinks, for instance. which is essentially a very social gathering of like-minded individuals in Singapore who have a commitment, at least a passion for sustainability, and generally speaking are either, I would say, one person, one woman sort of companies. But engaging in those kind of groups is often a real accelerator in finding out what other people are doing and jumping on the back of that. We all face, all businesses are facing the same issues. If they want to dispose of their recyclable waste responsibly, they need to find companies that can recycle that waste in a responsible kind of way. And networking like that, I think is one of the first steps that I would take, absolutely, is to try and engage with some of those kind of social groups and just ask pertinent questions. And I'm very sure you will quite quickly find some solutions. You're totally right that reading these documents, I spend a lot of time reading documents. That's why I've got quite big bags under my eyes. These standards go on for hundreds and hundreds of pages. Of course, they try and cover every eventuality, and cover themselves, big, very long disclaimers and all of these kind of things. But I think to smaller businesses, again, it's really a question of proportionality. If you're concerned about environmental issues, then what issues is it that you're contributing to as a business? I think nowadays we're all pretty well aware of environmental issues, and I think we could all say to ourselves, okay, it's the energy I use in my facility, it's the fuel I use driving my car or my truck fleet, it's the waste I create in packaging my products. I think these things nowadays are quite intuitive. Just start small. Don't try and cover everything. Find an issue and go after it and find a solution. And the solutions are all out there now.
Rotarian Tom Wolf has his hand up for quite a while. Are you okay, sir?
Yeah, I have one comment. I believe that small companies and big companies will have all an ESG audit in the future, like a finance audit. And this audit will give clients, suppliers, a clear understanding with whom you are working. But generally in Germany, the highest court has criticized the government because they want to have 2050 net zero. They joined the club of net zero, but they are doing nothing at the moment. Not the companies only doing nothing. So the governments are not making the rules year by year, 21, 22, 23, 24, how to come to the net zero. If we are not starting now, the High Court of Germany has criticized, has said, look, we don't believe you will ever reach this target because you have not started already. And I believe it's wrong to let the government not making the rules worldwide. It needs to have rules with clear targets. And I generally believe more in market economy and not that companies are taking government jobs. Of course, we are all trying to be the best in ESG, and there is some finance which comes in if we are good. But I think we cannot release governments to making rules and clear targets which the society has to fulfill. This is, we will not reach the target half by 2030, and we will not reach net zero 2050. So I believe it's really the task, it's on the table of the governments in all countries to set targets for every year and not only for 2050, as you said. Not the companies will start 2045, the governments start 2045, which is even more worse at the end.
So I totally agree with you, sir, and Mr. Edmunds as well. I think we should also look at the other fingers. Then we point a finger at other people, they point at ourselves. We always look at ourselves because we are the ones who make the change. Yes, we want the governments to help us, aid us, guide us as well. But there are many, many organizations, young and old, and big and small corporations who are striving to make a change themselves. And I believe that this is where the change starts from and grows from. And with our pressure in our stance, our change will grow, and the governments will take notice, and the governments will also be forced to act and come up with change, as you have rightly and most aptly and most urgently have mentioned. Just a small question. There are a lot of other questions. There's a small question. As we have for the first year this time a sustainability section to the Rotary Club of Singapore. If there's one aspect for us to focus on, what would be your suggestion, sir? As a Rotary Club of Singapore. So please unmute yourself, sir, Mr. Edmunds. Sorry.
I'm sorry. That is a very, very good question.
In the Singapore context, for example, I know I've not been here long.
Yeah, I think overall, you know, the Rotary Club and the business community at large has really got to, you know, put its weight behind the initiatives of the Singapore government, particularly the Green Plan 2030. The previous questioner was absolutely right that governments need to be held to account. And of course, different places are different in their nature. The Dutch people took their government to court about the Dutch government's, you know, carbon targets, which the public generally felt was not aggressive enough. In November this year, we will have COP26, which is when the governments of the UN come together to review progress in terms of greenhouse gas targets and the national contributions from different countries. So I think what the Rotary Club and its members can do is continue to push government. Government is moving in the right direction in having its Green Plan 2020. There are some really quite aggressive targets in there when it comes to, say, waste reduction, food waste reduction, or say the food production, to source 30% of our food locally by 2030. That is, let's be honest, that's a huge business opportunity. That's a huge business opportunity. The target to generate, I think 25, I forget exactly the number, 25 or 30% of energy from renewable energy in Singapore by 2030, I think. That is a very aggressive target. That is an aggressive target for most countries, not all countries, but most countries. But for an island the size of Singapore, with the resources that Singapore has, that is a very, very aggressive target. But again, it's a tremendous business opportunity. So I can't think of anything more specific than that. I wish I could. Maybe I'll come back to you a bit more specifically. But I think, you know, every company, the fact that the Rotary Club now has an environment and sustainability committee, I think, is a very, very important step forward, because it signals to members and it signals to the wider community just how important an issue this is. And that is the most important thing, really.
Thank you, sir. Sorry to put you in a spot. This is a fireside chat after all. So anyway, good that you mentioned the COP. The IPCC have also met last month in a big bang, and the slogan was Code Red for Humanity. But I have a question here from Rotarian Varun, who's, I think the answer is very, very long, so maybe we can have a shorter version of the answer. He asks, how can we integrate emerging markets to follow ESG, where the first concern of people is to make sure they have enough food on the table to eat the following day? I understand the push from Europe, but how practice is it when a big percentage of, how to practice it when a big percentage of the world population can't follow? So I think
Well,
part of the answer is the bigger organizations who fund the smaller organizations who fund the smaller countries to help them with education and sustainability projects and etc. So what do you think is the answer, Mr. Edmunds?
Well, I totally agree with that sentiment. I think that is a very, very critical question. And often when I think about sustainability and I think about environmental destruction, largely that environmental destruction has been driven by the West, by the developed nations. Even though now China is the biggest emitter of CO2 per year now, it still hasn't emitted as much CO2 as the West has emitted since the year 1850. And so in many ways, the West is looking back and saying, well, we've made all of these mistakes. It's in the past. It's too late now. But let's kind of, I suppose on one side, there's a genuine interest to try and help developing nations not make the same mistakes that have been made in the West. And I think to a degree, that's a sincere kind of ambition. But on the other hand, I think it's a little bit selfish because still the developed markets source a lot of their materials, a lot of their food, a lot of their timber, a lot of their palm oil now comes from developing nations in the South Americas and Southeast Asia. So I don't think that developed nations should preach to less developed nations not to make the same mistakes that the West has made. But I hope that the developing nations will recognize that it's not in their interest to make those same mistakes. And so while they might not have the resources to implement these ESG standards to the T, I think that they should be looking and are looking at doing things in a more environmentally conscious and sustainable way. I don't know if that answers your question, but
no, it does. It surely does. But I was more looking for something like a compensation, because if let's say China has started to burn more coal suddenly, it's because they did not have the opportunity to burn it while the West was burning. So if there could be some kind of a compensation that world should think that these emerging markets deserve, because even given the opportunity, given the constraints, they have very less opportunity or more constraints to grow. So if they get compensated, or if they get a lot of benefit of doubt or something, some support towards their businesses, so they can also grow, come to the same table, do the same things, and at the same time, help the whole world achieve the target.
Well, I agree with that also. And then we start to get into sort of political kind of considerations. And I have to say, I'm not speaking on behalf of Peterson, my company here. I'm speaking on behalf of myself. But you're absolutely right. It's amazing now that, for instance, Norway, I don't know anybody around the table from Norway, is receiving a lot of acclaim at the moment because I think it's reached about 50% electric vehicles, which is really good. And also they use a lot of renewable energy. They have tidal energy, hydro energy. So actually, when you look at Norway, their energy consumption, their CO2 emissions as a nation are really very low. But the fact is they're still pumping gas and oil out of the North Sea and selling it to other countries. And so really, that's not a very fair comparison to make. And we do need even the greenhouse gas protocols and the Paris Agreement doesn't take account of those sort of cross-boundary implications of things like imports and exports and where energy is originated from and consumed. And that is probably the biggest need that we have, so that there is a fairer sort of allocation, if you like, of targets and commitments according to each country's sort of economic status, if you like, or development status.
Okay, just to pull you back to the companies level, not the political level, our youth service director, Mr. Rotarian Mukundan, he's asked, we know that most of the companies are trying to adopt the ESG certification due to the CO2 emissions. Paperways are being audited now, but how do we make sure most of them adopt it?
Well, I think there are always two ways to go about things. One is the carrot and one is the stick. And, you know, my background, of course, in Hong Kong, living in Hong Kong, which is always prided itself on being a free market economy. The government has always been very, very unwilling to introduce, you know, onerous regulations that it felt would sort of inhibit the market freedom and development and so on. And so that works okay if your customers and the wider society will be able to steer you in the right direction. So in other words, you know, maybe nowadays this ESG certification or this carbon credits or carbon certification, all of these standards, all of these initiatives are really still not that common. And so a lot of companies, they promote themselves on that basis that we've got this certificate, we received this award, we're better than the other companies. But gradually, I think more and more companies will start to adopt those same standards. And then it's the ones that don't do it, they become noticeable in that they're not implementing these standards and sort of obtaining this independent verification, which is so important.
Thank you for that, Kevin, because I also believe it's a social and moral considerations that each company has to take care of that to adopt it internally, but not the small businesses. Medium and large enterprises should adopt it because that will reduce a lot of emissions what they are having it.
I will add something as well, which I think is quite relevant. There's a recent case with one of the big petrol companies, BP. BP has always been very prominent in promoting itself as being environmentally sustainable, which of course is ironic because it produces a dirty, polluting fuel. But nonetheless, it has done more than many other oil companies to reduce its environmental impact. BP also received a lot of criticism from its shareholders and the wider community on its carbon reduction targets. And so what it started to do was to sell off some of its assets to reduce its carbon footprint. So BP can say, okay, we've reduced our carbon footprint. Actually, the reason is that they've divested those assets, they've sold them to somebody else. And it's been shown now that the organization that bought those older assets, they're producing more greenhouse gases than BP would have done if BP had kept them within its own portfolio. And so, again, this comes back to the greenwashing, but some companies do try and do very good things, but because they raise their profile, they get criticized for what they're doing. Whereas other companies in the same sector keep a very low profile, and honestly, we don't know about them, but they're continuing businesses in many cases and not adopting the same level of standards of those more famous brands.
Oh, thank you for that.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Rotarian Mukundan. Just
Ganesh.
a question, Mr. Edmunds. Have you heard of the nature-based solutions?
Yes.
So we have a question on nature-based solution from Rotarian Sri. She said that the nature-based solution is something that's related to it's like an environmentalist group looking at a global perspective. Can you give examples of the nature-based solutions that we can implement in the urban setup like Singapore or KL, or even this region?
Well, certainly, I think there's some very, very good examples. Essentially, nature-based solutions are being more widely recognized now as being, as the name suggests, a potential solution to some of our environmental problems, particularly climate change. And so as sea levels rise, for instance, you know, we can expect to see more erosion around our coastlines, where particularly in Southeast Asia, mangroves provide a very, very effective barrier against coastal erosion. They absorb the sea's energy as the waves crash in. They bind the soil together under the water, under the substrate. They provide an ecosystem and stripping that out. And we've seen this very, very often. I've seen it personally firsthand in Hong Kong, how taking away mangrove growth from areas of coast has led to increased coastal erosion. The same can be said for in the urban area, particularly tree planting. You know, in Hong Kong, certainly, and I think in Singapore as well.
1 trillion trees push. The
sorry?
push for 1 trillion trees, isn't it the push?
The push for 1 trillion trees. Now, you know, we might say, well, that's a little bit sort of, how much difference will that make? Is it too late? But it depends where those trees are planted. Hong Kong in particular has a terrible problem with the urban heat island effect. And, you know, street temperatures are 10 or 12 degrees hotter than the ambient temperature because of all of the concrete. It absorbs the sun energy, it re-radiates the energy, the temperatures increase. The streets are very narrow, the pollution builds up. It's generally a very unpleasant place to be. And what is the outcome of that? People close their windows and switch on their air conditioning. And what is the outcome of that? They generate CO2 from the electricity that they're consuming. And what is the outcome of that? Well, the CO2 further raises the external temperatures. Okay, Singapore has got it right, I think, in my view anyway, in that, you know, greater urban greenery has a very measurable effect on urban temperatures. Plus the width of your streets and those kind of things. I think generally speaking, the microclimate in Singapore, certainly in the CBD, I think it's much cooler than it can be in Hong Kong in high summers. So as more and more cities in Asia begin to develop more rapidly and they become more high-rise and they want to squeeze more housing into smaller spaces, I hope they'll be able to look at Singapore as a role model and say, just wait a minute. There is a benefit in allowing green space. There is a benefit in rewilding, tree planting, allowing urban, even urban farming and those kind of things. It helps to reduce the ambient temperature and it helps to reduce the reliance on air conditioning.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kevin Edmonds. In summary, I would like to say that we were all very enlightened for having your presence and a chat with you. I would like to summarize it as my personal opinion that this whole sustainability push depends on us as an individual. Michael Jackson says that the man in the mirror, we have to look at ourselves first. And here is where everything starts, within ourselves, by ourselves, through our Rotary clubs, through our companies, or even through individual pressures of our government. But it all begins with us. And thank you very much for highlighting that. Any last words before we get a comment from our president? Mr. Edmunds?
No, really, just, you know, thank you for your time. And really, I do agree with you, Dr. Ganesh. Everybody can change behaviors a little bit and make a small contribution, but all of those contributions will begin to add up.
Thank you, sir. President Lewis, thank you very much for this time.
Thank you to both Mr. Kevin Edmonds as well as Dr. Ganesh for being the moderator. I certainly enjoyed the series of questions and the answers. We have a lot to do, and of course, I would like to ask if Louisa has a last word instead of me. So Louisa Lee is the one who will be the environmental and sustainability champion in our club. And so she has to work with many people, and we are going to rope in more people to help with these efforts. It's not going to be a one-year project, it's a 2-year or maybe 10 years. We've got until 2045. God knows who's going to be the president then from this group, in this chat group now, or this Zoom meeting. Somebody will be the president. Okay, it's definitely not me, it's not P.E. James, it's not BP Dr. Chan, it's somebody else. So Louisa, any last words from you?
Well, not last words, but certainly would like to thank Kevin once more. I mean, the first time I met you, you were just so knowledgeable in terms of the breadth of knowledge that you have. And thank you for so patiently sharing. And yeah, and just would like to announce to everyone in the club that this Friday night at 7 o'clock on the 1st of October, we're going to have our first ever chapter meeting. And we'll be inviting beyond our previous speaker. And actually, Kevin, if you are actually able to spare us the time, do welcome you to join us also. And that is where we hope to be able to nail down a major project that we can be supporting, right, or applying for, right, for this Rotary year. Actually, the 1st of October is also going to be the launch of the plant-based diet challenge. As we know, actually, if we are all vegetarians, there is going to be a lot of good in what we are doing in terms of, you know, going towards a carbon net zero world. So would hope that those of you who are not aware of this initiative, I will share in the main group later on, and please sign up. And there will be a host of activities in the coming 2 weeks following this. But I hope to see more of you on Friday night's meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Louise. And next week, okay, is our club assembly. And of course, DG will be visiting us. That's District Governor Dolly Yap. Okay, for those of you, okay, who have been invited for next week and you're not a member, I'm sorry. Next week is only for members. So that's the 6th of October, only our club members. Visiting Rotarians, we are sorry to disappoint you, but it's for club members. So we've got important things to discuss, including environment and sustainability issues. So with that, I really would like to say a big thank you to everyone for joining us this evening. We thank all the Rotarians from overseas. We thank our speaker, and we thank again Dr. Ganesh, and also the team in our secretariat, Linda, Bernie, and Jessica, for doing this. So thank you, and have a good evening, everyone. For those who want to stay back to have some fellowship for a few minutes, please do so. Thank you. Meeting is closed.
Thank you. Thank you.